Well, hi, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're on the West Coast. This is Jennifer Hinkel. We're talking to you from the Data Economics Festival. We're in the last day of the festival. Since Monday, we've had a number of panel discussions, I think more than 20 at this point, where we're talking about the intersection of data and economics, how digitization of our world is really impacting the way that we live and impacting a number of business sectors. So if you've been following through the week, we've had conversations on things ranging from energy, climate, and agriculture to finance and fintech. We've had a number of talks on the health sciences and biotech world. This talk today is also focused on health sciences and biotech, and I'm very happy and honored to have with me two fantastic guests, and I'll let them each introduce themselves in just a minute. So Casey and Sanath, just thank you guys so much for being here today. We're going to have a chat about new and emerging business models for rare disease, which if people aren't familiar with that and you're tuning in from a sector outside of health sciences, one of the things we'll talk about is what is a rare disease and why are these important? But in particular, what we'll talk about the current business models in healthcare and developing new therapies, why they maybe don't work for some of these new or rare diseases that we're looking at. We'll talk about some new ideas. We'll talk about data, a little bit of finance. And also I'd love to hear from you guys just your own personal and family experiences in this space and how patient activism and family activism is making a difference. So with that, I will turn it over. Casey, if you could introduce yourself to the audience, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Jennifer. Excited to be on this and a huge believer in what you guys are doing. So honored to be here. My name is Casey McPherson. I have not been in this sector for maybe but a couple of years. I'm a rare disease. I'm a father of a rare disease daughter who was diagnosed a few years ago, and her name's Rose, and she's 5 years old, and quickly saw that this was an area that needed help and needed some disruption. And so I'm on the journey of creating a therapeutic for her, but also on the journey of helping this industry in whatever way that I can excel, because there's too many kids that are dying. There's too many children that need our help. And I was completely unaware of this before this happened to me. And now looking at the numbers and knowing these numbers, I'm wondering why I didn't start doing this right out of college. So I'm currently executive director of To Cure Rose Foundation, and also actively working on a rare disease equity fund to help push science around rare disease therapeutics forward more quickly.
Thanks so much. And Casey, what did you do before you got into this space?
Well, I've been a musician most of my life. In fact, this is a new haircut. I never would have dreamed I would have worn a shirt like this up until maybe a couple of years ago. Typically, I had a hoodie on and some strange hat and some weird beard manicure. But I've been, I've traveled the world, and lucky enough to write a couple of songs that got some top 10 kind of hit status in the US. Had a top 10 video on VH1, and really worked my way all the way up to the middle in the music business, and really enjoyed it. But once I became a dad and I shifted into real estate investment and app building and some small business ventures in Austin. And then once I found out about Rose's diagnosis, I've kind of put all of that on the back burner and just focusing on this space now.
All right, I just wanted the audience to know how cool you are, and it's really cool. You're a cool parent, and you're a cool rock and roller, and it's awesome to have you here today.
Thanks, Jennifer.
So Sanath, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. It's definitely a great honor for me. Similar to Casey, I am a dad too. My son Raghav is 2.5 years old. About a year and a half ago, on his first birthday, we got his diagnosis that he has an ultra rare genetic condition due to a mutation in a gene called GPX4. He is one of 9 kids in the world with this disease, and so it's super rare, and it's also quite fatal, there's not a lot of kids that are alive with this condition because of how severe it is. So I've done a lot of work in repurposing small molecule drugs. I started building gene therapy for my son. And in the process, I also discovered that a lot of other parents like me, like Casey, are going through this journey without a lot of help and foundation to be able to build their own therapies. So I started a new nonprofit organization called Open Treatments Foundation that I'm leading, and I also started an open source software project to build a platform, a software platform that can help rare disease parents like us get to treatments on their own. So our focus is on building gene therapies using the software platform, but hopefully we will expand to other therapeutic technologies down the future. And I've been super interested in this problem of just solving rare diseases in general. And it's a fascinating problem to me because my background is in software, and just like problem solving is what I do a lot. And this is one of the problems that I'm just like not able to crack. So I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about funding rare diseases as a problem because I think it's huge.
That's great. And yeah, I mean, I love that we have a group of people here who are coming from different backgrounds. I mean, I guess, yeah, among us, I'm the only one that really has a biotech healthcare background. So I came from working in the biotech industry for a number of years. I spent some time at Genentech, which is owned by Roche, which is about as big pharma as you can get in the pharma world. Then went into consulting with a lot of really smaller biotech companies, as well as some of the big pharma companies. I was really focused on oncology, a little bit on rare disease, and have also spent some time in the diagnostic space. And I'll just share that what I've seen, across all of this time, I mean, oncology and cancer drugs, they get a ton of funding. Some of the rare diseases get a ton of funding, but I think the definition of rare is not maybe as rare as you're saying, where you have ultra rare of 9 patients. I mean, you can have rare when you have a few thousand patients, even I think up to, sorry, Casey, you probably know the exact number here, and I should, but I think it's something like
200,000.
200,000, is that right? Okay,
is classified
thank you.
as
That's what I was gonna say.
That is rare.
But I didn't want to get
Yeah.
the number wrong. So I mean, and 200,000 is not that small. So I think, you can have biotechs where you still have a fairly sizable market and can work on the traditional model, maybe if you have 100,000 to 150,000 patients. And in even those cases, we're seeing the drugs come to market at price tags that some would call exorbitant, others would call, truly capturing the immense value of these drugs. I think there's a lot of debate on that and price and whether that price reflects reality or it's really negotiated down with the insurance companies. I mean, we could talk at length about all of that stuff, but what I'm really interested in is you guys have kind of come from other fields into this space by virtue of necessity. I mean, you're both really caring parents. You want to solve problems. You see that this is not just something that your families are dealing with, but something that a lot of families are dealing with. And up until now, they really have not had, I would say, the voice to go beyond patient advocacy into actually building businesses or building business models out of that. So I would be really interested to hear both of your thoughts about what your interactions have been like with, the biotech establishment, if you will, with any of the VC types or funders in biotech, and kind of what questions do they ask you? What questions do you ask them? And are they excited to see people from more of like the patient perspective and as well as different professional backgrounds get into this space, or is it kind of a closed club and it's hard to get your point across?
Well, my sense is that it's very, because it's a high risk investment, but it's also looked at as people are really looking at a monumental sort of return. And so some of the questions I have continued to see is it's similar in real estate in that they're looking at comps. What is the patient base? What is the current, I guess you would say, prevalence of patients? And right now we're looking at 500 patients and above in the US market would be something that is a possible investment. That's not a very high return, but there's a provable return in kind of past transactions. And, and they're looking at that, but they're also looking at, for Sanath and I, we see maybe it's a monogenic disease, maybe something that we think that, hey, there is a platform of a drug that we think has a possibility of being a therapeutic, but most of these investors are looking for really good data, and really they want some sort of purchased IP that you're building off of. And unlike when, in Sanath, you can probably speak a little bit more to this, but fundraising in the tech world can often be a really great idea where you're showing a potential customer base with some market research, and you don't necessarily need some sort of IP to raise capital. So for me, one of the biggest struggles is there's no money in this space of getting good bench science, basic science done to create enough data to make some of these rare disease possible therapeutics look like investable assets. So that's one of the big struggles I've been seeing around that, talking to them. What about you, Sana?
Yeah, so the point about incidence and prevalence is all that really matters at this point. If you're investing in a disease, the risk you have in the IP, the animal models, and all of those things are secondary, right? You first ask the incidence and prevalence and do the math and see how much money you can get. You can make realistically as a company.
Sana, explain what those are real quick too, because I actually just learned the difference between the two.
Yeah, so incidence is a number of new population or new patients that are born with this disease or diagnosed with this disease every year, and prevalence is the current number of people that have been diagnosed with this disease. So you can use that to kind of extrapolate and say, in 5 years you're going to have X number of people with this condition. Now the model breaks because these rare diseases are challenging and are complicated and are potentially fatal, right? And so when you look at that model from a disease like diabetes or blood pressure, you can bring in other variables like social determinants of health or exercise and other things to control for the fact that this patient will continue to live and will probably continue to take the drug. But now with rare diseases, you're suddenly in a space where the patient can get sick really, really quickly. And even before your drug sort of kicks in, or the drug might not have a long-lasting effect, and suddenly you're in the space where the total addressable market is small, the duration that you can address the disease is also small, and so inherently you're looking at companies that are just being created for the value of the IP value of it and being sold off, rather than actually being a real business model. Right, a tech investor would look at it differently, right? They would look at it as, okay, your total addressable market is X. Here's your competition. How much of this market can you actually capture and retain the value in the long term? Whereas in the biotech world, at least for rare disease focuses, the conversation is, even if you have the incidence and prevalence, it's a lot more challenging to actually know how much of the market you can retain in the long term.
As both of you guys talk, I'm thinking about the common models we have in tech and the common models we have in biotech. And I'm thinking of companies like, Moderna, which everyone knows now, it's a household name. They have this mRNA technology that people are now pretty familiar with because of the COVID vaccine. But I don't know if a lot of people know that prior to the COVID vaccine, they were really, really struggling. They were not a company that had commercial products on the market. They were maybe looking at smaller market sizes, and they kind of got a windfall by being able to get into the COVID space so quickly. But as I think about that, I really do think about the platform play. So if we're thinking about, modular, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but like how much can we modularize or templatize an approach to solving rare diseases, especially like with these genetic components, now with the CRISPR technologies and all these other things on the market? I mean, do you guys think that that's kind of the approach? I mean, it sounds like maybe that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the platform or the modular play is certainly the long-term play here. I think there is also a paradigm shift that is needed here, which is think of the biotech value chain and chop it into smaller chunks. So if you think of what it takes to actually deliver a drug into the market, the higher funding and the more sexier companies are the ones that are actually taking a drug to the patients, and that's exactly what Casey and I want, right? But that is not the best way to actually build an ecosystem. The better way to build the ecosystem is chop them up into modular chunks, put good money in each one of them, build lower cost solutions for each of the modules, and then chain them up. So when the integrator comes in, in the tech world, they call systems integrator, right? These are folks that just take everything, smaller pieces, Legos, and assemble them, get it to the finish line. They're actually done cheaper and faster. And so that's a better way of doing investments in biotech, whereas now the way we do investments end up essentially not working for anybody's favor.
Yeah, I love that. And this is, you know what, one of the things that excites me the most about the kinds of things you're saying like we have some models for this from the tech world that we could port over into the biotech world. I talk a lot about models from the biotech world that we could port over into the tech world. So, you know, it's really funny how despite being very science-based, these two different like silos of innovation have kind of grown up alongside of each other, even in similar geographies, like in Silicon Valley. And still the business models and the approaches are so different. So I really appreciate you bringing that perspective, because I like it. I mean, one of the things that Casey and I have also talked about a lot is just the evidence barrier, I think, in these rare diseases. So for those who might not be familiar with kind of clinical trial design and statistics of that and improving your clinical utility or your endpoint, I mean, it's really hard to run a clinical trial if you've got just a handful of patients with a disease. You can't really run the traditional like double-blind study. You're not going to have a population size that lends itself to like really complex statistical methods. I would say if you have something that in vitro looks to be really promising, there are a lot of families that would just want to have access to that as soon as possible, because these diseases, you know, I mean, people with these diseases could, as you said, get sick really quickly or deteriorate over time. So there's kind of a running against the clock element to this. So Casey, I know we've talked about this idea of like the data sharing and also data credit, being able to go back to families or patients, because the other thing is if you're one of 10 or one of 500 patients with this disease, your molecular and genomic data become incredibly valuable.
For sure.
I think that patients and families should be able to share in that. So has that kind of been a piece of your thinking along the way? And how do you think we should be considering some of these like the data sharing and evidence aspects of this space?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's a really big part of cracking this code for even what Sanath just said, of doing these pieces really well. And, you know, right now, when we're looking at early stage R&D, they're primarily coming from academic researchers, you know, right. and which is maybe being funded by pharma or you know, a mutation that they're interested in, and so they're waiting to kind of pick up that data to really start with something. But then there's the tech transfer office they have to deal with, and so it's right now we don't have any value for anything up until it is an IP. And what I know less of than probably both of you guys, but what is really interesting to me is the idea of kind of parsing out the value of where data is coming from and re-looking at how we're looking at that, you know. And so if parents or a foundation is funding some research and someone else is doing something here, and we may have just lost Sanath. I don't know, maybe he'll be back on.
Yeah, he just hopefully.
Yeah, oh, come on.
Just vanished for a second, but.
Should I keep going or wait for him to come back?
I mean, I think you can keep going.
Okay, but that's what I'm interested in is there a way that we can kind of section out these pieces of data that we are gathering and attribute value to those organizations, because then it's going to make everybody want to work. It's going to create an incentive to work together, as opposed to this incentive to hold things really tightly so that you can get to some place that has value. And then it's been like an all or nothing sort of paradigm unless you're really licensing something. But it just doesn't seem to be working very well right now.
Yeah, and you know, and Casey, I've had really similar thoughts, and we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, I think that this space does not lend itself right off the bat to the model, like the VC model of investing in biotech that has existed before. And that's why I'm wondering, is it more of a model and maybe this is on my mind because our next session coming after this is investing in data. I mean, is it a model where they're investing in the data? Is it a model where we're investing in the outcome? So if we're looking at a societal wide outcome of what does it mean to be able to fix not just, you know, one rare disease or ultra rare disease, but thousands of ultra rare diseases. I mean, this is kind of like the long tail of healthcare science to me, right? That we have. It's really unreasonable for us to, in my mind, to say like, oh, it's not worth it to look at this little thing or this little thing or this little thing because the incidence is small. If we bubble that up a little bit, the incidence is actually significant. And the other thing I don't think is known enough is that the resource expenditure out of the healthcare system that you know, someone might look and say, well, like we should never have a drug that's $500,000 or $1 million, even if it's a cure. But I'm like, okay, and actually, I don't know if you guys know my friend Nathan Yates. He's an economist and finance guy and has SMA, and we talk about this quite a bit. He's like, I'd love to show people my hospital bills from before when I was getting some of these expensive drugs, because he said it costs so much more and my quality of life like wasn't as good. So isn't it better to spend a little bit more on the drug, have a much better quality of life? I don't have to spend, you know, this much of my time in the hospital, and oh, I actually have time to do things like run my business now.
Yeah,
Right.
and that drug changes too. I mean, that price every time it gets treated, the expense of that drug just got cut in half, you know. And so insurance companies are just now starting to look at that. Global Genes just released that huge thing on the burden, the economic burden of rare disease, which is great. And we're in this place that possibly, like you said, Jennifer, people are going to start having to talk together, and policy is going to need to be in place. But when we start looking at that, if, you know, SANATH and I may not be in time for our children, but we recognize that the work that we do will be in time for other children. And that's for ever until something better comes along, but it's going to be building upon it. So, you know, the return on that. And the one other thing I wanted to say to what you just said, Jennifer, was that where I agree with you, when we look at one disease, there's a lot of risk. But when we look at a lot of different diseases, and this is where BridgeBio has kind of cracked the code a little bit, is that you're kind of de-risking your investment from a portfolio angle, because some of these that don't make money, some of these that we develop a lot of data, but we need more, we need better science, we need better tools to get there. We still have that data that's ready for these new discoveries and tools. And so, but you're able, and then some of these are huge successes. And so when you have that kind of more portfolio model, it significantly de-risks that investment.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there. And I think, I mean, what I'm thinking is, so the new model has got to be a combination of the financing piece. It has to have the platform, like the technology, scientific technology platform piece, and then this kind of portfolio aim. So in a way, the company is also acting like, you know, with that mindset of the investor who's spreading their risk across a lot of different pieces, which I think that's not something foreign to the way that big pharma looks at stuff, because they certainly look at this like portfolio wide things, and you want to have assets that are just being developed, and as your other assets kind of get old or they get new competitors in the market, you have new things coming up. I think there are a blend of models here, but one of the things I think that we've all emphasized is we've got to get all these pieces talking to each other. Because as before we officially opened the session, we were all commenting, like, I think everybody thinks somebody else is going to take care of this problem of like fixing the rare disease model. So the finance people think that big pharma is going to fix it. Big pharma thinks that like little biotech is going to fix it. You know, and in the meantime, we've got real patients and real families that are like, hey, the clock is ticking. We've got kids alive now who need treatments and need cures. We have, you know, people continue to be born with these kinds of rare diseases, and they should have options. So, you know, I think that all of us feel that sense of urgency. And I think if there's one thing that we would probably all like to convey, it's that, hey, we need to all feel that sense of urgency and not assume someone else is taking care of this issue.
Absolutely, yeah. The sense of urgency is something that, you know, it's very hard to know how to be urgent in this field unless you really are a parent with a kid. with one of these really challenging conditions, because for us, urgency for someone that is just like having a happy life without any medical challenges, urgency would be, I need to get this done by this evening. For Casey and I, the urgency is like, can I get it done next minute, right? It's just ingrained in us, because as parents who are seeing our kids every second like losing their life, there's a different level of urgency that we all need, and we need to somehow get that imparted into everybody in the industry.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I definitely feel that when you guys speak, and I also, I mean, the love that you have for your kids and the dedication to this cause for your kids and for others is tangible and really meaningful. So I hope people pick up on that. I know we've got only a few minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience out there? Anything that you want to ask these awesome guys?
Hey, while you're looking at those questions, Sanath, could you just give everyone a rundown a little bit of open treatments and kind of one of the problems you're solving? And then I would love to hear how it's related to some of your vision for data, and how that's how you're seeing that parsed out a little bit, while we're kind of gathering some questions. I would love for people to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks for asking. But the fundamental premise that I'm going after is if we cannot solve this conundrum of getting treatments of rare diseases by centralizing in big pharma, or centralizing in small pharma, or whatever, right, or in academia, can we flip the problem and say, can we decentralize drug development? So the idea is that if we bring more people into the process of developing drugs, give them the right tools, and have them make progress, then the economics in the industry changes, right? You have now more drugs that could be potentially licensed by pharma, which would create more companies, startups potentially, which would create more requests for approvals through the FDA, and that would eventually even create a faster pathway to all these rare disease treatments. And if you just take the cost of investing in all of this value chain, it's probably significantly higher than what we are investing in biotech today. And that would then start to beg the question of, how do we drive down cost, and how do we make the investments cheaper, which should hopefully bring down cost of treatments as a whole. And none of this is possible without new infrastructure. And I'm hoping to build a software platform that will allow all of us to share data among ourselves, data between diseases, to kind of make this handoff between one party to another easier and seamless.
That's great. And a follow-up, I have a question from the audience that goes with that really nicely. Could data be used to pay for experimental drugs at the expense of privacy, but then not breaking the bank?
Possibly, but I don't think you should be using data to pay for experimental drugs. It's too cheap. Data aggregated has more value than individual data. So you can throw your genomic data on GitHub, like all the 3 billion base pairs. No one's going to care about it, right? But the data aggregated across a cohort of people has more value, because then you know what is happening with these people. So paying for data for experimental drugs is not going to be sufficient.
Do you remember, though, when we were talking about open, when you just showed me your platform, Sanath, and we were talking about, because Sanath's platform can kind of take someone all the way through a gene therapy kind of therapeutic pathway, and there's these markers of getting to this point A and point B and point C of that what do they call it, the odyssey, the therapeutic odyssey, and so with that chunk, like, there's a proof of concept data, that has value, and there's safety tests that has value. There's mouse model data that has value, and so historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at the entire thing as one chunk that's always moving, and it's like, here, you have it, or I have it, or we're going to share it, but we haven't really parsed it out. And what I love about Sanath's model is that it has the potential of showing these kind of value points within the process, and that to me starts kind of giving us chunks that we could potentially put value on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that idea. And if you think about what he said with the distributed development model, and you also think about this idea that, traditionally in biotech, we've had these like milestone payments when like a big pharma is licensing something from a smaller. So is there a way to combine this idea of the distribution, what data is being proven out along the way, and then to have investment points, and maybe those investment points come from traditional VC? I mean, there's a lot of other people and entities with funding out there that have different types of models that don't need to see that VC-like return. Maybe they're looking for a different type of return. Maybe it looks like bonds, and
exactly.
they could be backed by the data. And maybe those instruments, I mean, that's what I'm starting to think, like we could have instruments that pay out when the discovery reaches certain milestones. And that discovery doesn't have to happen in one lab. That discovery outcome could be defined by, a lot of people in a distributed fashion working together and plugging their data into this network.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, what we're looking at right now with biotech is if they're seeing a disease that's being hard to work on, they just shelve it. And so it stays there. It's kind of in prison, so to speak. And then it has zero value to them. But when you go and you ask for it, all of a sudden it becomes really, really expensive. And and so that shouldn't be happening, because children are dying while it just sits there, and no one else, everyone else will have to completely reproduce all of that data to get to where that is, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, Casey, it's like the real estate analogy where there are people sitting on empty houses where you have like when you have rents going up. I mean, that's not really bringing utility to society. There is a bigger issue. So I think that would be a wonderful part of the potential business models to explore, is how do you get big pharma, how do you help them find a win, even if they kind of don't want to do it? And how do you stop them from like holding on to stuff really tightly, but then not commercializing it? So a couple more questions. Sorry, do you guys have a little more time to hang out?
Yeah, I'm good until
like 10 or 15 minutes.
I have to drop off in like a couple of minutes.
Okay, well, we'll do a lightning round then of the next two questions, and then we'll say goodbye for now. But what kind of incentive structure have you seen work for other rare disease therapy investments? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, so the government incentives work quite well. The Orphan Disease Act and the rare disease drug development voucher, or the pediatric review voucher, priority review voucher has helped pretty well. Those are governmental incentives. I haven't seen any non-government incentives that has worked quite well just yet. But there are people are exploring also different options for incentives from the government for ultra rare diseases as well. So I think when you think about incentives, the government incentives are what come to mind at this point.
Thanks, Casey. Anything to add on that, or we'll lightning round to the next one?
Just that SANATH was talking about incentives in his platform that I know that was one of the conversations of trying to crack that code to create some incentives around what you were doing, which I'm excited about. So just for anyone that's out there, check out Open Treatments. This is really going to revolutionize this field with that as well.
And so the last question to close with: if you could get one resource immediately or one connection to help move these cures forward, what would it be? Money, big pharma partnerships, something we haven't said? It's really a money issue.
It's money, cash. I don't want partnerships.
I mean, they say cash and science, money and science, and they both lead each other. But for SANATH and I, our need is great and our time is limited with solving some of these problems. So you're not talking about a few $100,000. You're talking about a lot more money than that to really make the impact. And so for us, that's where a lot of the focus is.
Thanks. And thanks for again ending on that sense of urgency. So let's get off the Zoom, back to work, and see what we can do to help out your kids and other kids around the world who are dealing with these conditions. Thank you guys so much for your time today. This was fantastic, and I look forward to the conversation continuing urgently and quickly, and us figuring out how we tackle this together. This has been fantastic.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.